Mr. President.
The Republican leader is recognized.
Mr. President, I ask consent that further proceedings on the quorum call be dispensed with.
Without objection, the leader is recognized.
Mr. President, first I'd like to express my strong support for the resolution on the floor honoring the victims and the heroes of the Tucson shooting, and I thank Senators Kyle and McCain for introducing it. Now let me take this opportunity to express once again my sympathy to the families of those who lost their lives that morning, and to join with all those who are persevering in prayer for the injured, including Congresswoman Giffords, whose condition, thankfully, still appears to be improving day by day. We will never forget the heroism of those who sacrificed their own safety that morning in Tucson for the good of those around them, nor the dedication of those who attended to the wounded immediately after the shooting, both at the scene and in the hospital rooms in the days that followed. We thank all of them for giving us, in the midst of this horrific event, some reason for hope and a powerful example of service to follow. It's my hope that today's resolution will help in some way to preserve the memory of the dead, the injured, and the heroes of Tucson. Hopefully, out of this terrible national tragedy, the rest of us can draw strength and inspiration, grow in concern for those around us, and deepen our sense of purpose about the work we do here every day. Now, Mr. President, on another matter, for 2 years, I have insisted again and again that the two parties can and should work together on legislation that would spur the economy, create an environment for good, private sector jobs, and put our nation on a stronger footing for the future. Last night, the President did the same. So this morning, I'd like to accept the President's offer to work together, just as I did after last year's State of the Union. I agree with the President that we can and should work together to increase, without federal mandates, production of more domestic sources of energy, including nuclear, clean coal, and natural gas. On strengthening and protecting our borders and enforcing immigration laws, on increasing U.S. exports by completing free trade agreements with South Korea, but also Panama and Colombia, on medical liability reform to rein in frivolous lawsuits, on finding a bipartisan solution to strengthen Social Security for future generations of Americans, on finishing the job in Iraq and Afghanistan, and on simplifying the individual tax code and reducing our corporate tax rates, which are making it harder and harder for U.S. companies to compete around the world. Working together in all these areas would help the economy by encouraging the creation of private sector jobs, improve security, and help us keep our commitments to our children and to our parents. And I take the President at his word when he says he's eager to cooperate with us on doing all of it. But achieving each of these things should be an end unto itself. It cannot be contingent on some cynical bargain whereby one party agrees to secure the border as long as the other party agrees to amnesty for illegal immigrants, where one side agrees to increase domestic energy exploration as long as the other side agrees to cripple the economy with higher fuel prices, where one side agrees to fight terror as long as the other side agrees to artificial timelines and preordained withdrawal dates. In other words, a bargain whereby the party offering to work together has no real intention of working together at all. And too often that's been the approach this President and his party have taken over the last 2 years. Take health care. For more than a year, we offered to work with the White House and Democrats on a bill that would incorporate the best thinking on both sides. They refused every step of the way. And in the end, they got the bill they wanted, a massive government-driven system that creates an unknowable number of new bureaucratic entities and 2 massive new government entitlements, which is already leading people to lose the care they like, which nearly 2/3 of U.S. doctors surveyed predict will lead to worse care, and which is causing already struggling businesses to struggle even more with a mountain of new mandates and fees. It's only after this disastrous bill has become law that the President says he's now interested in making it better, even as he belittles the legislative concerns so many Americans continue to have about it. He's taken the same approach to spending and debt. 2 years ago, the President came to Congress and told the country we needed to invest in the future through $1 trillion stimulus that was supposed to be a model of transparency and efficiency. Within a year, this bill, which was sold to us as the answer to our nation's economic woes, had become a national punchline, a tragic waste of money. And 2 years after that investment in our future was signed into law, what do we have? Nearly $3.5 trillion more dollars in debt and nearly 3 million more Americans out of work. These out-of-work Americans don't want to sit around and wait for the Democratic vision of the future to appear. Compliments of the experts in Washington. They're not particularly moved by someone's vision of what America could look like 40 years from now if only they hand over more of their paychecks or more of their freedoms now. They want a job. They want Washington to stop trying to help them and let them help themselves. So the President talks a good game, but call us skeptical. Because when all the applause is over and the speeches are through, the debt is higher, more and more wasteful spending, and job-stifling regulations come to light, and millions of Americans are still asking the same simple, persistent question. Mr. President, where are the jobs? The President has made some good suggestions on areas where we could work together, and we stand ready to do so just as we have in the past. But we've now seen enough to know that what the President says and what the President does are two very different things. He's called for investments in energy before, and we got the stimulus. He called for working with us on trade. We're still waiting. He said before we need to get serious about the debt, even as it reached dizzying new heights as a result of his policies. He speaks like one who recognizes that spending is out of control, and yet his response is to propose that we lock in spending levels we already know are completely unsustainable. Mr. President, this isn't progress. This is an admission of defeat. Americans don't want a spending freeze at unsustainable levels. They want cuts, dramatic cuts. And I hope the President will work with us on achieving them soon. To put it simply, the President still sounds like he's trying to have it both ways. His tone may be changing, but based on past performance, we'll remain skeptical until we see actual results. Republicans have pledged to the voters that we will do everything we can to cut wasteful government spending, work to lower the debt, get government out of the way of economic growth, and to work to repeal the health care bill. Even as we replace that health care bill with the kind of common-sense reforms people actually want. The President has shown he's willing to talk about some of these things. Let's hope he surprises us by showing a new willingness to do more than that, to actually work with us on achieving real results. Mr. President, I yield the floor.
Senator from Texas. Mr. President, I notice the absence of a quorum. Clerk will call the roll.
Mr. Akaka. President,
The Majority Leader.
is the Senate in a quorum call?
It is.
I ask consent that be withdrawn.
Without objection, the Leader is recognized.
Mr. President, it's my understanding that all time has been used under the order that's now before the Senate. If it's not, let's pretend it has, and let's start the vote now.
Without objection,
I
the order for the vote will be changed to
Right now.
2:25.
And if people need some extra time, we're not going to be, we have other time tonight, but with the weather as it is, people want to vote. I ask for the yeas and nays.
Is there a sufficient second? There appears to be. The clerk will call the roll.
Mr. Akaka. Mr. Alexander. Ms. Ayotte. Mr. Barrasso.
Just getting back to this issue. So this qualifying individuals not otherwise
Mr. Baucus.
in the exchange.
Mr. Beckich.
Which gets to the jurisdiction. The question is where does the line fall?
Mr. Bennett. Mr. Bingaman. Mr. Blumenthal.
Presumably
Mr. Blunt.
part of it, FEHB.
Mr. Bozeman. Mrs. Boxer. Mr. Brown of Massachusetts. Mr. Brown of Ohio. Mr. Burr.
It's
Ms. Cantwell. Mr. Cardin.
amending the FACA
Mr. Carper.
jurisdictional.
Mr. Casey.
By
Mr. Chambliss.
including under
Mr. Coates.
this GAC's jurisdiction,
Mr. Coburn.
you're eligible to get your
Mr. Cochran. Ms. Collins.
As I said, I think
Mr. Conrad.
the answer is his GAC.
Mr. Coons.
In essence, the decision as to whether for his GAC
Mr. Corker.
findings of this be held.
Mr. Cornyn.
Speaking of which,
Mr. Crapo.
medical care access.
Mr. Dement. Mr. Durbin.
Official title, complete patient access.
Mr. Ensign.
Provide improved medical care.
Mr. Enzi.
The excessive burden of life
Mrs. Feinstein.
on healthcare delivered on the
Mr. Franken. Mrs. Gillibrand.
last year went to health as opposed to judiciary.
Mr. Graham. Mr. Grassley. Mrs. Hagan. Mr. Harkin. Mr. Hatch. Mr. Hoven. Mrs. Hutchison. Mr. Inhofe. Mr. Noe. Mr. Isaacson. Mr. Johans. Mr. Johnson of Wisconsin. Mr. Johnson of South Dakota. Mr. Carey. Mr. Kirk, Ms. Klobuchar, yes, sir. Mr. Cole, Mr. Kyle, Ms. Landrieu, Mr. Lautenberg, Mr. Leahy, Mr. Lee, Mr. Levin, Mr. Lieberman, Mr. Lugar, Mr. Manchin, Mr. McCain, Mrs. McCaskill, Mr. McConnell, Mr. Menendez, Mr. Merkley, Ms. Mikulski, Mr. Moran,
You put me down for a yes. I've looked it over. It's okay.
Ms. Murkowski, Mrs. Murray, Mr. Nelson of Nebraska, Mr. Nelson of Florida, Mr. Paul, Mr. Portman, Mr. Pryor, Mr. Reed of Rhode Island, Mr. Reed of Nevada, Mr. Risch, Mr. Roberts, Mr. Rockefeller, Mr. Rubio, Mr. Sanders, Mr. Schumer, Mr. Sessions, Mrs. Shaheen, Mr. Shelby, Ms. Snow, Ms. Stabenow, Mr. Tester, Mr. Thune, Mr. Toomey, Mr. Udall of Colorado, Mr. Udall of New Mexico, Mr. Vitter, Mr. Warner, Mr. Webb, Mr. Whitehouse, Mr. Wicker, Mr. Wyden. Senators voting in the affirmative: Akaka, Alexander, Ayotte, Barrasso, Bekich, Bennett, Blumenthal, Burr, Cardin, Chambliss, Coates, Collins, Corker, Cornyn, Crapo, Durbin, Ensign, Graham, Hutchison, Inhofe, Isaacson, Johnson of Wisconsin, Kyle, Lieberman, McConnell, Merkley, Moran, Murkowski, Reed of Nevada, Rubio, Schumer, Tester, Thune, and Udall of New Mexico. No senator voted in the negative. Mr. Enzi, aye. Mr. Lugar, aye. Mrs. Boxer, aye. Mr. Leahy, aye. Mr. Wicker? Aye. Mr. Grassley? Aye. Mr. Portman? Mr. Portman? Aye. Mr. Coburn? Aye. Ms. Stabenow? Aye. Mrs. Murray? Aye. Mr. Wyden? Aye. Mr. Pryor? Aye. Mr. Menendez? Aye. Mr. Brown in Massachusetts? Aye. Mr. Toomey? Aye. Mr. Blunt? Mr. Blunt? Aye. Mr. Risch? Mr. Risch? Aye. Mr. Johans? Aye. Mr. Dement? Aye. Mr. Harkin? Aye. Mr. Conrad? Aye. Mr. Kirk? Aye. Mr. Paul? Mr. Paul? Aye. Mr. Carey? Aye. Mr. Vitter? Aye. Mr. Whitehouse? Mr. Whitehouse? Aye. Mr. Baucus? Aye. Mr. Johnson of South Dakota? Aye. Mr. Nelson of Florida? Aye. Mr. Udall of Colorado? Aye. Mr. Hatch? Aye. Mr. Bozeman? Aye. Mr. Sanders? Aye. Mr. Coons? Mr. Coons? Aye. Ms. Snow? Aye. Mr. Nelson of Nebraska, aye. Mr. Inouye, aye. Mrs. Gillibrand, aye. Mr. Franken, aye. Mr. Roberts. Mr. Roberts, aye. Yes, sir. Mr. Cochran. Mr. Cochran, aye. Mr. McCain. Mr. McCain, aye. Mr. Hoven. Mr. Hoven, aye. Mr. Casey. Mr. Casey, aye. Mr. Shelby. Mr. Shelby, aye. Mr. Manchin, aye. Mr. Warner, aye. Ms. Klobuchar, aye. Ms. Landrieu, aye. Mr. Cole, aye.
I say for you.
Mr. Carper. Mr. Carper, aye. Ms. Cantwell, aye. Mr. Bingaman. Mr. Bingaman, aye. Mr. Brown of Ohio, aye. Mrs. McCaskill, aye. Mr. Lautenberg.
Tell me their names. I'll just give you a little plug.
Mr. Lautenberg, aye. Yes. Mr. Sessions, aye.
Yes, Kaufner. Are they going to do it for you?
They don't get on the record.
Mrs. Shaheen, aye. Mr. Reed of Rhode Island. Mr. Reed of Rhode Island, aye. Mr. Levin. Mr. Levin, aye. Mrs. Hagan? Aye. Ms. Mikulski? Ms. Mikulski? Aye. Mr. Lee? Mr. Lee? Aye.
Are there any senators in the chamber who wish to change their vote or to vote? If not, on this resolution, the vote is 97 yeas, 0 nays. The resolution is agreed and the preamble is agreed to. The motion to reconsider is laid upon the table. The clerk will call the roll.
Mr. Akaka. So the Senate just voting now on a resolution on a measure that honors the lives of the 6 people killed on January 8th in the shooting in Tucson, Arizona. The vote tally on that, 97-0. An update on a story from today. The Associated Press writes that a continuing weak economy and last month's bipartisan tax cut legislation will drive the government's deficit to a record $1.5 trillion this year. That's a new projection from the Congressional Budget Office. Associated Press continues saying that the numbers mean the government will continue to borrow 40 cents for every dollar it spends. We also have some live coverage happening on C-SPAN 3 right now. The House Natural Resources Committee is holding a hearing looking at the report on the Deepwater Horizon oil spill. The 2 co-chairs of the Commission on the Deepwater spill, William Riley and Bob Graham, are testifying. little more information about that resolution, who voted for it, who did not vote for it, on the tribute to the Tucson, Arizona shooting victims. 3 senators did not vote during that resolution. Senators Feinstein, Rockefeller, and Webb. The vote tally 97-0. An update on the House today. Finished legislative business after voting 239 to 160, ending public financing for presidential elections.
Come to the floor to honor Captain Martin Anthony Rigan, Jr. and his wife, Nicole Rigan. Their journey on this earth was cut short, but it was one filled with honor, purpose, and distinction. Anthony was one of those individuals who everyone knew would grow up to be exceptional, and he did. I've known him since he was a small child. We went to church together. I think it was in maybe the 7th grade when he approached me the first time about going to the U.S. Air Force Academy. I followed his path since he graduated from Pulaski Academy High School in Little Rock in 2003, where he served as class president, honor council president, and was a representative on the Varsity Football Leadership Council. During this time, Anthony received numerous awards for his character, service to others, and hard work. And then he fulfilled his lifelong dream to attend the United States Air Force Academy, where he continued to receive accolades for performance and leadership. As a member of the Board of Visitors at the Air Force Academy, I was able to visit the Academy from time to time. I enjoyed seeing the facilities and visiting with the brass, but honestly, I most enjoyed getting to visit with Anthony in Colorado. During these times, he reminded me about the true definition of selfless service. In his senior year, Anthony was selected to be Group 1 Commander for the Cadet Wing, overseeing 1,200 cadets and their activities. He was also named Cadet Colonel, the highest rank possible for a cadet at the Academy. He shared with me how excited he was to be graduating and how proud he was to serve our nation in our military. I was proud of all he was achieving, and he was certainly representing Arkansas well. Following graduation, Anthony began undergraduate pilot training in Columbus, Mississippi, flying the T-6 Texan, the T-38 Talon, and the B-1B Lancer strategic bomber. He received the Top Gun Award for formation flying and was presented with the Leadership Award by the local Air Force Association. Classified as exceptionally qualified to pilot the B-1, Anthony was scheduled to deploy this month to Qatar. In life, Anthony's favorite co-pilot was his wife, Nicole. She shared his strong faith and purpose. After graduating Colorado's Lewis Palmer High School as valedictorian, Nicole participated in CERTEEN, a volunteer program for teens in mission trips to Peru and Guatemala. She went on to study theater education at the University of Northern Colorado, graduating magna cum laude. She pursued her theater career and continued leadership roles in Bible studies and youth groups. During this time, many of Anthony and Nicole's friends and families found guidance through the devotionals they sent regularly. Today, we continue to find encouragement and inspiration through the selfless lives that they lived. I'll miss my friend Anthony and his lovely wife, Nicole, and I look forward to the day when I'll see them again. Thank you, Mr. President. I yield the floor.
Clerk will call the roll.
Mr. Akaka. Mr. President.
Senator from Florida.
Mr. President, I ask consent that the quorum call be lifted.
Without objection.
Mr. President, whenever a senator such as Senator Pryor from Arkansas has to announce to the Senate the loss of a dear personal friend, especially one that he has been friends with their parents for those years, it's always a tremendous, tremendous loss. And we're coming up in a couple of days on the 25th anniversary of another great loss in this country, when the Space Shuttle Challenger exploded on our television screens 25 years ago on the 28th of January, 1986. It was such a shock to the nation. It hit deep in our psyche because the symbol of America's technological prowess, which was the space shuttle in the infancy of the program, and Challenger was only the 25th flight of the space shuttle, that the nation witnessed in that rerun over and over and over of the close-up view of those solid rocket boosters going off in different directions 10 miles high in the Florida sky. And that was an extraordinary loss. I'll never forget at the memorial service in Houston at the Johnson Space Center, the President of the United States, who often in times of grief becomes not the President of the United States, but not the Commander-in-Chief, but the Comforter-in-Chief. We saw that vividly illustrated just a few weeks ago as our President, President Obama, delivered that ringing and highly emotional speech in Tucson, Arizona. Well, so too, 25 years ago, as all the crews gathered there at the Johnson Space Center, President Reagan touched the nation as the Comforter-in-Chief and pointed out that despite that tragedy, that they were doing what America has in our genes, and that is, by nature, we are explorers and adventurers. And we don't want to ever give that up. Otherwise, we become a second-rate nation. You look at the history of America as explorers. Remember the criticism that we read in our history books about President Thomas Jefferson when he wanted to spend a paltry couple of $1,000s on an expedition called the Lewis and Clark expedition to see if they could find a passage to the Pacific coast? And as a result of that mission, which miraculously they got there and then they got back, and most of them were alive, and they brought back all the artifacts of what this broad land contained. Well, it was that exploration. You remember when Tom Hanks played Jim Lovell in Apollo 13. Apollo 13, that mission that was one of the most successful American space ventures, not because they didn't land on the moon, because they couldn't. Most of the spacecraft on the way to the moon blew up, and we thought we had 3 dead astronauts that were going to drift in space until they ran out of consumables. And it was that incredible story about how all of America's aerospace expertise with the astronaut that had to stay behind because he had been training, but he was exposed to the measles, and he was replaced. And then he was there with all that knowledge of training for the mission that he could go into the simulator, and they could simulate real time how they were going to convert that motor of the lunar lander to get them kicked out of lunar orbit on a trajectory back to Earth. And remember, after they got back, Tom Hanks is playing in the movie Jim Lovell, the commander. And someone in an audience is asking the commander of the now safely returned crew of Apollo 13, well, do we really have the money to continue to explore space? And Lovell's answer is, what would it have been like if Columbus had returned from America and they never went back to follow in his footsteps as an explorer? And so it's on this time of tragedy, of hearing an individual senator, Senator Pryor, talk about the loss of loved ones and family friends and young people with bright futures, the reflection in a day or so of the anniversary of the Challenger tragedy and the loss of 7 lives, including the teacher, Krista McAuliffe, who was going to teach that lesson plan, that classroom from space, that we are once again reminded that because we dare to venture, because we are by nature explorers, there are risks, and sometimes there are prices to be paid, and sometimes that is with human life. But that is not a reason not to take that risk and to boldly venture forth. That's a good reminder for us as an American people as we face so many uncertainties, whether it be financial and our future of trying to get out of the recession, or whether it be that we don't know what the future holds in Afghanistan or Pakistan, or we don't know how that leadership of al-Qaeda is being morphed into other countries such as Yemen or Somalia, or we have this constant uncertainty of whether or not we will have a job tomorrow, or whether or not we can retrain to the new kind of jobs that are coming online. A lot of uncertainties. The uncertainties of our energy future. Can we remain dependent on 70% of our daily consumption of oil coming from places like the Persian Gulf and Nigeria and Venezuela? No. It's time for us to venture forth, explore new realms, develop new technologies, be creative. And of course, as the President spoke last night, you can't do that unless you have an educated workforce. That educated workforce that is so necessary for us to be creative, and it is that creativity, that Yankee ingenuity of Americans that keep us competitive in the global marketplace today, because we can out-invent, we can out-create. That's the change that America has. So as we reflect upon the tragedies, the individual tragedies that we have, the collective tragedy that we have as a nation 25 years ago with Challenger, several years ago with the loss of Columbia, the losses that we had most recently that are seared into our heart in Tucson, the hope that springs forth of those that are wounded that they would come back to lead normal lives. These are our challenges. Keep at it. Keep at it. I say this also because it's a time of uncertainty that a lot of pundits are having fun with what appears to be that NASA is in disarray. NASA shouldn't be in disarray. We have a blueprint. We have a roadmap for the future in the NASA bill that passed this Congress, one of the few that passed in the Congress before the lame duck session. And so it simply says, let's continue to encourage the commercial companies to develop a service of taking astronauts and cargo to and from the space station, and let's see if we can do that safely as determined by NASA, but more efficiently and therefore more cheaply, given the constraints of budgets. But at the same time, to then allow NASA to do what it does best, which is go out and venture out and explore the heavens. And in so doing, we are going to build a new rocket that will take large components up and that will fulfill the President's goal, which is to go to Mars. The President specifically set a timetable of 2025 to land and return safely on an asteroid. That's no easy feat, given the fact of how fast an asteroid flies through space. But it will give us new technologies as we develop to go to Mars. You think of the unbelievable time that it would take us under conventional technology, 10 months to get to Mars. And then once you got to Mars, you'd pretty well have to stay on the surface of Mars for a year until the planets are realigned, revolving about the sun, so that Mars comes in closer to the Earth for the 10 months trip back. That's why we need new technologies. And an astronaut that flew 7 times, Dr. Franklin Chang Diaz, a plasma physicist from MIT, is developing a plasma rocket that will take us to Mars in 39 days. Then, with that short time, flying at 400,000 miles per hour by plasma thrust, we could stay on the surface a month to return to Earth without having to stay a year. These are exciting new technologies. A pilot project of that plasma rocket with the acronym VASIMIR is being developed to fly on the space station and provide a continuous pulse that will keep the space station boosted instead of it having, in the degrading of its orbit, for conventional technology to keep boosting it. Not only is the sky the limit, not only is the stratosphere the limit, the heavens are the limit. If we as Americans will assume this can-do posture that is so typical of the personalities of explorers and adventurers, in other words, the personalities of us, we, the Americans. Mr. President, I yield the floor, and I would suggest the absence of a quorum.
Clerk will call the roll.
Mr. Akaka.